My name is Mason Reed. For 21 years, I was the first one in and the last one out at Dax and Tech. I didn't clock in late. I didn't miss deadlines. I didn't raise my voice in meetings or fight over credit. I just showed up and built things that worked every single day. No questions asked. I joined the company when it was two guys in a dream in a rented warehouse. They had a prototype and no funding. I brought them the stability they didn't know they needed. When the servers crashed, I rebuilt them. When our systems needed scaling, I wrote the code from scratch. When the product failed its first major demo, I stayed up 3 nights straight rewriting the interface. They used to say things like, "Mason, you're the spine of this place," or "We sleep better knowing you're behind the firewall," and I believed them. I never asked for more. I wasn't flashy. I didn't jump from company to company, chasing titles. I stayed loyal, steady. I built the infrastructure that now runs half their revenue stream. I filed every error report, designed every recovery protocol. When the company grew, I stayed in the background. While others got promotions, I got peace of mind. Because what mattered to me was the work. But something shifted. It started with fewer meetings. Then the interns stopped asking me questions. I became invisible. Then, during a routine Monday sync, my manager dropped the words I'll never forget. "Mason, we just feel you've gotten a little too comfortable." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time in 21 years that someone questioned my value, and I knew they had no idea what I was really worth. They had no clue, but they would. "Too comfortable," he said, like that was a flaw. I sat across from Darren, my manager of the past 5 years, in that sterile glass-walled meeting room where people pretended the world didn't hear what went on inside. He fidgeted with a pen, avoiding my eyes while the new HR coordinator sat stiffly beside him, waiting to read from her script. I had built stability. They called it stagnation. I didn't need to wave my arms in meetings or throw around tech jargon to sound important. My work was important. It didn't need a spotlight. It ran quietly in the background, like a perfect algorithm. What Darren and the new leadership wanted was flash, movement, noise. They wanted people who talked more than they built. People with LinkedIn quotes and standing desks who used words like disrupt and scale but couldn't troubleshoot a server crash if their lives depended on it. I was none of that, so they labeled me comfortable, and within a week, I was transitioned. No party, no farewell email, no handshake from the CTO, just a cold notice and an offer for career transition support, whatever that meant. I walked out of that building without a scene, without a word, really. I carried only one box, a backup hard drive, a notebook I'd used since the early days, and a folder labeled IP documentation, personal. No one noticed, but what Darren didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that in those 21 years of comfort, I had built more than systems. I had quietly filed patents, designs, architectures. I had attached my name to every critical component they took for granted. They thought I was done, but I was just getting started. 2 days after I left, I got a message from Claire, one of the few engineers at Dax and Tech who still had a spine. "They replaced you with Logan. Remember him? The intern from UC Irvine. Darren said he brings energy." Energy. That's what they traded me for. Not knowledge, not experience, not architectural mastery, just energy. Logan had shadowed me for 3 months the previous summer. He was bright-eyed, polite, and completely green. He thought APIs were low-level, and I caught him once trying to fix a permissions error by restarting the entire dev environment. Twice. And now he had my title, Lead Systems Architect. I almost laughed. Not out of bitterness, out of disbelief. Darren stood up in an all-hands meeting, I imagine, and introduced him with one of those fake motivational lines like, "We're entering a new era, and Logan's the future of Dax and Tech engineering." Except Logan didn't know the system. Not really. He didn't know where the load balancers had to be manually tuned during high traffic. He didn't know which scheduler scripts occasionally skipped tasks due to timestamp conflicts. He didn't know that one of the APIs had a hard-coded backdoor that only I knew existed for emergencies. But I knew. And more importantly, the U.S. Patent Office knew. 3 years ago, I began filing technical patents. Quietly, thoughtfully, not for lawsuits, not for leverage, just because it was mine. Because the system I built was me. And now they had handed it all, unknowingly, to someone who couldn't even spell container orchestration. It wasn't arrogance, it was fact. They thought they were upgrading, but what they really did was set the system to self-destruct, and I didn't have to lift a finger. My departure from Daxon Tech wasn't marked by applause or a farewell cake in the break room. No speeches, no framed photo, no final group lunch. It was a meeting, and then it was over. After Darren's awkward delivery of the decision, the HR rep handed me a printed exit checklist. I scanned it. Return badge, return equipment, sign off on digital access termination. Standard, clinical, forgettable. The walk to the front desk felt longer than it ever had. On my way out, I passed the wall of plaques. One of them had my name, Employee of the Year 2011. It was dusty. People looked up from their screens as I passed by, then immediately looked back down. They knew, but none of them stood up. Fear is stronger than gratitude in corporate America. The receptionist, a new hire I didn't recognize, took my badge like she was collecting a library card. She didn't ask why I was leaving. I walked through the glass doors and into the parking lot with my box of things. 21 years, condensed into cardboard. It should have felt like loss, but it didn't, because I knew something they didn't. I had already copied every line of my architecture documentation to a private drive years ago. Nothing proprietary, nothing unethical, just my work, my ideas, my flowcharts, my vision. And those patents, filed, approved, enforced. They hadn't even asked who held the IP for the core message queue system, or the adaptive scaling protocol, or the real-time diagnostic dashboard that Darren once presented at a conference, with my name conveniently missing from the slides. No, there was no goodbye, but there would be consequences, and they were coming soon. They expected me to leave empty-handed, emotionally, intellectually, strategically, but that's the thing about underestimating quiet people. We don't shout, we prepare. I didn't raise my voice in that final meeting. I didn't argue, I didn't ask why, because I already knew. Darren wanted someone cheaper, younger, easier to manage. Someone who smiled at PowerPoints and posted motivational quotes on Slack. I didn't fight it, but I left with more than they realized. Years ago, after the third time someone else took credit for a system I designed, I started documenting everything, not just for me, for protection. Diagrams, version notes, architecture strategies, all saved to a private encrypted drive, legally mine. All tied to patent applications I filed under my full name, Mason Elliott Reed. I didn't steal anything. I didn't break any contracts. I simply kept records of what I invented, and I made sure it was legally recognized as such. The queue balancer algorithm that kept their cloud from crashing during holiday traffic? Mine. The predictive maintenance dashboard that cut server downtime by 28%? Mine. The internal compression protocol that saved them millions in storage costs last fiscal year? Filed under USPTO number 712934A. Also mine. They assumed everything inside Daxon Tech was built for the company, but much of it was built within the company, by me, and no one ever asked about ownership. I walked out of that building with one small box, but I carried decades of leverage in my back pocket. And while Darren was likely celebrating his streamlined team, he had just created a problem he couldn't see. Yet, there's a fundamental misunderstanding in corporate life. They think that just because you built it while employed, they own it. But there's a difference between execution and invention. Most of what I created at Daxon Tech wasn't in my original job description. No one told me to reimagine their queue systems. No one asked me to compress diagnostic logs into real-time metrics. And absolutely no one had a clue how I had managed to reduce back-end failure rates by nearly half. Because I didn't just fix problems. I created solutions no one else could see. And that's the thing about innovation. If you file it before someone else does, It doesn't matter who signs your paycheck. It matters whose name is on the patent. Over the past 5 years, I filed 6 patents related to back-end infrastructure, data flow optimization, and intelligent failover systems, all under my own LLC, a tiny shell company I formed years ago for consulting purposes. I made sure each one was worded precisely to reflect the methods I developed, not the final company product. The lawyers would need weeks to untangle it, but I wouldn't need a single day because I owned the DNA, the blueprints, the logic behind the product that was still running under Logan's watch. Sure, he could keep it online for now, but when something broke, and it would, he'd start looking for documentation, only to realize that the key components weren't in the wiki because the keys were in my name. Darren and his new team thought they had saved money by cutting me loose, but they hadn't just lost a developer. They lost the mind behind their entire foundation. And when foundations crack, buildings fall. In tech, there's a lie we tell ourselves: code is just code. Anyone can write it. That's like saying a piano is just keys, and anyone can compose Beethoven. The truth, code has a fingerprint, not just in syntax, but in style, structure, intuition. And Daxon Tech's entire backend architecture had mine written all over it. From the way error handling routines were layered, to the timing of the auto-scaling triggers, to the sequence of the custom rollback protocols, it was all me. Sure, there were other devs over the years, but they came and went. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who built not just the what, but the how. And the how was everything. See, it wasn't just about lines of code. It was about processes, the handoffs, the logic that connected API A to QB before Sync C could even begin. It was elegant, it was invisible, and it was fragile if handled by the wrong hands. Logan didn't know that the data stream compression worked only because I had rewritten a legacy JSON parser line by line to bypass a memory leak. He didn't know that the smart alert system was actually just me, manually tuning thresholds over 2 years based on customer feedback in server logs. He didn't know that version 3.6 of the diagnostic engine had a silent failsafe that deactivated if the version hash didn't match my original key. A key only I had. None of this was malicious. It was meticulous. They called it company property, but that was just the product. The code? Mine. The process? Mine. The thinking that made it all possible? Also mine. And soon they'd feel what it was like to lose something they never really understood. Claire called me 2 weeks after I left. She never gossiped, never exaggerated. So when she opened with, "You're not going to believe this," I listened. Apparently Logan, the intern who now held my job title, had managed to stall an entire sprint by accidentally pushing raw TypeScript to production without compiling it. He didn't even know what a compiler was. Let that sink in. The company that once trusted me to personally rebuild a failing infrastructure during a multi-region outage now had someone in my place who thought Git conflicts were a bug. Claire said the dev team was scrambling. The product owners were confused. And Darren? He was reframing expectations. Logan had charisma, sure. He had the TED Talk energy, the right sneakers, the startup buzzwords. But charisma doesn't debug stack traces. It doesn't optimize resource allocation. And it sure as hell doesn't rewrite a broken data pipeline at 3 a.m. while a client threatens to walk. I wasn't surprised. You can't hand a scalpel to a med student and expect them to perform heart surgery. And yet, they had. They gave him my seat, my monitor, my systems, but they couldn't give him my knowledge, because knowledge isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. And now the system, my system, was buckling under his polished resume and clueless keystrokes. It wasn't personal, but it was poetic. I didn't need to sabotage a thing, they were doing it themselves. And I was just watching the cracks spread, one clueless commit at a time. It started small, like most collapses do. A minor bug in the reporting dashboard, the kind of thing I used to fix before anyone noticed. Then came the missed sync. Weekly data didn't push to the client interface. No alert, no backup trigger, because Logan had cleaned up the monitoring scripts he didn't understand. Then the real trouble hit. The message queue, the very heartbeat of Daxon Tech's system, started timing out under moderate load. Claire messaged me again. This time, no preamble. Something's wrong. Darren's freaking out. We had 3 clients call in today complaining their dashboards were frozen. I smiled, not out of malice, out of certainty. You can copy my job title. You can sit in my chair, but you can't replicate 21 years of hard-earned intuition. The code was breaking not because of sabotage, but because the soul of it was gone. The queue timeout was avoidable. There was a patch, a smart little buffer I had coded 2 years ago after a nasty Q4 bottleneck. But Logan had disabled it, thought it was legacy bloat. Now the CEO was on the floor. Investors were asking questions. And Darren? He was sweating through his button-down in emergency stand-ups, saying things like, "We just need a moment to stabilize." Stabilize? That was me. I was stability. And now that I was gone, they were beginning to understand just how many problems I'd been solving without ever needing a meeting. They hadn't just replaced me, they had removed the foundation and painted over the cracks. But paint doesn't hold up under pressure, and the pressure was building fast. Darren held an all-hands meeting the Friday after the outage. Claire told me about it. Apparently, he stood in front of the whole engineering team and said, "We've hit a small technical hiccup. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a temporary setback." A hiccup. That's what he called it. Meanwhile, 3 core clients had put their accounts under review, 2 projects were paused indefinitely, and support tickets had tripled in 48 hours. They acted like it was a storm passing through. But I knew better. For me, that level of chaos used to be a normal Tuesday, and I handled it without panic, without headlines. I didn't make excuses, I made solutions. Every time the system flickered, I was the one who caught it. Every bottleneck, every memory leak, every silent failure that could have cost them $1 million account, I handled it. Quietly. They never noticed because they never had to. But now every little glitch echoed through the walls. Now their Slack channels were lit up like a fire alarm. Now Darren had to say things out loud that I used to prevent silently. I wasn't watching for vengeance. I was watching for the moment they'd realize. You can't replace reliability with enthusiasm. Logan's swagger meant nothing when the logs made no sense. His fresh perspective didn't matter when the pipeline collapsed under real-world data. They called it a setback. I called it proof. Proof that what I did, what I built, wasn't just work. It was invisible architecture. Invisible. Until it broke. And now, finally, they could see every missing piece. It was a Wednesday afternoon when my phone rang. Unknown number. New York area code. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. Once. "Mr. Reed, this is Jessica Alton from Fisher & Dre Legal. We represent Daxon Tech. We're reaching out regarding certain IP filings that appear to be in your name. We'd appreciate a conversation at your earliest convenience." There it was. Not from Darren, not from HR, from legal. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. I knew this day would come, not because I wanted it to, but because I'd planned for it. The patents they were suddenly so curious about, filed under my LLC, registered with my personal documentation, time-stamped, notarized, and completely legal. And now they were running into a problem. Their infrastructure, their entire platform, had components directly dependent on technologies I had filed under my name. Of course, they could try to argue work for hire, but they'd have to prove intent, prove that I was explicitly commissioned to create those exact systems. They couldn't, because half of what I built came from late nights, weekend experiments, and my ideas solving their blind spots. I never signed a blanket IP assignment clause. I checked. And now their entire legal team was realizing they were standing on uncertain ground. I didn't call back, not yet, because they needed this more than I needed them. And because there's nothing more satisfying than knowing the same people who dismissed you are now panicking over what you legally still own. They had my badge, they had my desk, but they never had the blueprint. And now they were starting to see what that meant. Line by line, lawyer by lawyer. People assume that when you get fired unfairly, you sit at home stewing in resentment. They imagine you scrolling through LinkedIn, watching your replacement fumble, feeling rage boil up with every notification. But I wasn't bitter. I was busy building something better. In the weeks after Dax and Tech let me go, I didn't waste time. I used it. I reached out to two former clients, the ones who always came to me directly when they needed answers, not buzzwords. They remembered me. One of them said, "You were the only one who actually knew what was going on over there." They didn't need convincing. Within a month, I was quietly consulting, under my own name, for firms that had once paid Dax and Tech six figures just to access the systems I built. Except now, they were paying me for cleaner versions, more secure, more flexible, designed from the ground up without the clutter of a bloated company or middle managers who didn't know RAM from ROM. I wasn't just earning money. I was earning freedom. Meanwhile, Dax and Tech was sending increasingly desperate messages through legal. "Would you be open to a conversation? We're happy to compensate for temporary licensing. We'd like to clear up a misunderstanding." There was no misunderstanding. They fired me for being too comfortable. But I wasn't idle. I was embedded. I was the code. I was the process. And now, I was the competition. I didn't need revenge. I just needed space. And once I had it, I built something that ran cleaner, faster, and without the dead weight they called management. It was a Thursday morning when Darren finally called me himself. No lawyers, no middlemen. Just his voice cracking slightly through the speaker as if he'd rehearsed humility but hadn't mastered it yet. "Hey, Mason, look, I know things ended weird, and I just, well, wondered if you'd consider maybe stepping in, just for a short period, consulting, nothing formal, just to help get us stabilized." Consult, that word, as if I hadn't been consulting for 21 years already, without the title, without the pay, without the recognition. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. I let him talk. Let him explain how Logan was still learning, how the architecture had grown complex, how the investors were asking some uncomfortable questions. He didn't mention the patents, didn't mention the licensing mess, didn't mention the fact that half the systems had my digital signature embedded in their core dependencies. Instead, he tried to sell me nostalgia. "You helped build this place, Mason. No one knows it like you." Now he remembered. I asked simply, "Under whose terms?" He paused. "Well, we're open to discussion." That was all I needed to hear, because I wasn't angry. I was aware that the only reason Darren was calling now was because he had no one left to call, because the intern failed, the systems failed, and the illusion that I was just a replaceable piece failed. Now he wanted the piece back, but the terms, those would be mine. I sent Darren an email that same evening. No pleasantries, no explanations, just numbers and conditions. $45,000 up front, 600 per hour, billed weekly. No non-compete clause, access to all systems, full administrative rights. And one more thing, I retain exclusive licensing for all patented components. No exceptions. Silence. For 3 days. Then an email came back. Short. 2 words. "We agree." No negotiation, no resistance. Because Darren knew this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a reckoning. They didn't just lose a developer. They lost the developer. And now they were paying for what they threw away. Plus interest. The first meeting was held over Zoom. Darren looked tired. Claire was there too. She gave me the smallest of smiles. Logan? Nowhere in sight. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I logged in, restored the Q balancer, patched the scaling script, rebuilt the diagnostics flow, and sent a summary report. 2 hours. Problem solved. Darren asked, "Can we discuss extending the engagement?" I answered, "No, that was the engagement." He blinked, confused. So I clarified. "You wanted stability. I gave it back. You wanted access. You got it. You wanted me. And for 2 hours, you had me." And with that, I ended the call. Because some people confuse helping with returning. But I hadn't returned to Dax and Tech. I'd returned to prove something. That when you build the walls, you decide who walks through the door. I haven't stepped foot inside Dax and Tech since the day I handed in my badge. But I don't need to. because my name is still everywhere, not on the door, but in the system logs, in the version histories, in the infrastructure that still runs their product. Every time a client dashboard loads, it pings a line of code I wrote. Every time their database auto-scales, it follows logic I designed. Every time they recover from failure, it's because of a protocol I embedded. They don't say my name in meetings anymore, but they depend on it. And that's the kind of presence no title can replace. The patents, still mine. The architecture, still protected. The reputation, even stronger, because I walked away and they had to crawl back. These days, I run my own operation, lean, focused, and respected. I choose my clients, I name my terms. And when someone asks what I did before, I just smile and say, I used to keep a tech company alive, quietly. They thought I was too comfortable. What they didn't realize is comfort is what you earn when you've already done the hard part. And me, I earned every line, every hour, every right to walk away with my head high, while they stare at screens full of my fingerprints.